So one of the things that I wanted to start with is, as we talked about, is adding value, investing in everybody in our team, really helping everybody to become better and grow and expand. And part of that begins with your knowledge and your intelligence and really growing with what you know so that you can start implementing what you've learned, and ultimately the results are different. One of the key things that I want to start before we begin with a good stewardship is, I've been on a lot of mission trips, and I really enjoy going on the mission field and experiencing new cultures and just seeing the way of life. And one of the things that I have learned and I've gleaned from almost every different country that I've gone to is the people that are in poverty, even locally, the people that are in poverty, in many cases, what they lack is the knowledge, the information they need to really start thinking differently, to start transforming. And in most cases, because most people are in a poverty lifestyle, this is something that has been handed down. These are bad behaviors, bad habits that have been taught from generation to generation. And nobody's ever been there to say, hey, it stops here. And nobody has ever even asked a question, hey, what happens if you keep doing what you're doing right now? And so these people ultimately get up every day. They've got no direction. They have no purpose. And they really have no information to be able to create their own opportunities in their own future. And so what ends up happening is they get to a place where they get to repeat the same mistakes of their forefathers. And guess what happens with those people? In fact, they usually tend to have more children than the average person, right? And what ends up happening is they pass it on to the next generation. And what do you think happens to the next generation? They repeat the same exact mistakes, if not worse, and they keep going there over and over and over. So that's one side of the spectrum that I want us to really consider. So part of my investment in you is I don't want you to repeat. Now, I'm not saying you're at that level of poverty, but I'm saying I don't want you to repeat the same mistakes that the average person makes that keeps you where you are, that makes you pass it on to your family member, because in the future, our goal is to leave a legacy that lasts, and that legacy is to transform that pattern. So there's one side of the spectrum, right? We have complete poverty, no knowledge, no education, and no opportunity for them to be able to go after something greater than where they're at. Then we have the other side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, which is what we have in America, is we have so much access to information. We literally have ocean and oceans of data that we can pull from, but we're really starving for the knowledge. Because one other thing I've learned is we can know a bunch of stuff, but if we don't know how to incorporate, how to apply that information, it's worthless. And a lot of times what ends up happening with really smart people that I've met is they have so much data in their head that they don't even know how to separate it so they can actually have an action plan to implement it. And what's sad about it is you can have a great conversation with that person, and they'll even have a really stimulating conversation with you and share with you all kinds of information. But that's about as far as it goes because they don't implement the information. Have you ever seen those people who I've literally met people in various fields, so it's not just health and fitness, but I've met people, a buddy of mine, his name is Justin, he is a very studied person. And I would say that probably you give the guy 20 minutes to study a topic, and he is able to absorb that information so quickly that when he shares with you, you almost feel like he's known this for 30 years. He's eloquent, he knows the key words, he knows how to structure it. But what I learned over time is that as you spent time with him and he knew everything, all he had to do was Google something, and within 20 minutes, literally, he knew all the facts, the history, the key words, everything flowed so well. But then one day I finally kind of got fed up with all this knowledge because I didn't see any fruit of what he seemed to know. And so I started asking him questions. And so what have you done in your life to implement this? And the moment I started doing that, he stopped sharing information with me because he realized he's going to get called out. And what's unique is here he is one time was talking about health and all of this scientific study and how you can maximize your growth and get muscular and healthy and all this stuff. But I'm looking at him and I'm like, you don't look healthy to me. Right? So I'm like, so what of all this scientific stuff, what have you done to actually change your body? And so what I want to do today is I really want us to reflect as we talk about the Good Steward, which is this next series. Before we get into information, before we start diving into a bunch of content, what I want us to do is first think about our lives and our bodies and our spirit kind of as land. God owns this land. And he's given us this land. And in order for us to really be able to plant, what do we have to do first? We have to start toiling the dirt. We have to start digging in. And sometimes when you dig in, it doesn't feel good, right? It's a lot of labor. It's a lot of work. So I don't want to scare you, but today, most of the content that I'm going to begin sharing with you is going to be tied specifically so that you can really start digging in. So if you don't have a pen and pencil, I want to encourage you to pull that out, or if you have your laptop, I want you to write this down, because we're going to be doing some tests. Before we really start talking about your productivity and being a good steward and the benefits of stewardship and everything else, today it's going to be a little bit more intimate. Today we're going to start digging in. And I'm going to ask you to be completely honest with yourself, because at the end of the day, it helps me if you become more productive. But guess who benefits more if you become more productive in your life? It's you. So the more honest you are with yourself, the better the reward for you. Does that make sense? And so I want to begin today by starting that out. So first, as we get started with the Good Steward series, today is going to be more of an introduction to basically what a good stewardship looks like, and really start asking some key questions. Because what I've learned over the most successful people in the world is that they have a whole nother level of quality questions. And those questions are what lead to the answers and the right answers. And so a lot of times it's about what questions you ask that determine the level of success you have. Everybody with me so far? All right, beautiful. So let's begin. So what is the definition of a steward? So I want to share with you two definitions that I found. And I mean, I could sit here because obviously this is a biblical word. So there are literally books and books just on this word stewardship. But the position and duties of a steward is a person who acts as the surrogate of another or others, especially by managing property, financial affairs, and estate, etc. So this is somebody who doesn't own something. They've been entrusted with something, and they've been given a responsibility over that. Does that make sense? So steward, is basically literally is a man over the house. And that's a really good example, and that's why I wanted to keep it very simple. So if you're a steward, you've been entrusted with something, and you are the man over that domain, over that house. All right? And so it's imperative that you really start beginning to understand of what a steward is. So here's what's interesting, especially in our culture right now. In our culture, if you rent a house, right, you get to pay monthly to have access to that home. But what happens if something goes wrong in that house? Who do you call?
The owner.
You call the owner, right? And so, but the reality is, especially if it's a successful owner, does that owner deal with that issue? No. You know who deals with the issue? The property manager. He's the steward responsible on behalf of the owner. Does that make sense? Now, if that steward doesn't deal with the issue and the issue gets worse, what happens when you actually have the actual owner come back to the house and make an account on that property? What do you think happens? Who gets in trouble? The tenant or the manager? Right? The manager. Why? Because the manager was entrusted with the affairs of that particular property. And so if the tenant had an issue and he brought it up to the actual property manager, it is the manager's job to come up with a solution and take care of it, so that when the owner comes back, he can give an account. Does that make sense? So in essence, to keep it simple, you are the property manager of your life. You have been blessed with the very breath of air that you're breathing today. You are the property manager of your body, of your mind, of your talents and your gifts. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But I want to do is right now is I want to read specifically from a Bible verse. Everybody that talks about stewardship usually ends up reading this. So I'm going to do it as well. And this is a parable that Jesus taught in the book of Matthew, chapter 25. So I want you guys, as I'm reading this, to visualize this moment. This is a picture. This was an illustration that Jesus was giving to his disciples, okay? So he says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them." Before I proceed, who is he entrusting with his wealth? Servants.
Stewards.
Does that make sense? So he is entrusting them with his wealth. And we can get real biblical here, but I'm just going to, again, keep reading it. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. So write that down. Each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one who had the 2 bags of gold, he gained another 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of the house, the master of those servants, returned and settled accounts with them. And understand that no matter what, in life, in business, in your family, someone is going to come back to settle accounts. And this is really what I want us to be thinking about, is that mentality of when somebody comes to settle accounts with you, Christine, or with you, Carlos, are you going to be ready to be able to be a good steward, or are you going to be in the opposite direction? So let's continue that. After a long time, the master of those servants returned to settle accounts. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge over many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. And I just want to pause for 1 second. What was interesting about this illustration is that Jesus could have very easily said to the guy who had 5, who gained a total of 10, he could have said, you have been faithful with the 5 things. I'm going to give you 50 things. But he said you will be over many things. And what is the reward that he gave the other guy with just 2, who turned it into 4? It was the same reward. Does that make sense? So it wasn't that based on that number. He had gained the trust of his master, and his master was going to put him over many things because he had proven himself. Does that make sense? I just want to pause so you think about that. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you do not scatter seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. That's a pretty harsh response when the guy gave you your money back. Would you agree? It's not like he lost it. Imagine what would happen if he lost it, right? But what we're looking at here is he said, you wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I do not sow and gather where I do not scatter seed. Well then, you should have put my money and deposited with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it with interest. So then ultimately, he goes on to say, so take the bags of gold from him and give it to the one who had 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so the reason why I want to begin with that visual, and I want to give you this picture, is this. Because in life, I don't care what you believe or what you don't believe, you are a steward of your life, of every aspect of your life. And one of the lessons that I really believe that Jesus really depicted here was that you can be the steward that multiplies that stewardship and grows it and is a good steward of it, or you could be one that literally doesn't do anything with it and literally hides your financial abilities, your gifts, your talents, and everything else. In the end, we all know that that person who didn't use those gifts and steward them correctly, are they good or bad? Bad or good? Anyone? It's okay for you guys to answer. I promise I won't slap you. Right? So the answer is they were a bad steward. So if you were to hire somebody, let's say now you're the owner, would you hire that steward? Yes or no? The answer is no. So the real key question I want to ask you guys as we consider this is, are you a good steward right now as you stand, or are you not? And that's really where we have to begin this journey, because a lot of times we can talk about the principles, but until we start looking at ourselves in the mirror and digging in, we cannot identify where we are and what areas we need to correct. Does that make sense?